Alrighty, we've hit that time. Let's go ahead and get started. So right now you're in the cover crop implementation, incorporating cover crops into ranching systems. Zach Byram will be presenting. Just real quick, just read his bio just so you kind of get to know him a little bit better. Zach is a district manager for the Clear Creek Conservation District in Buffalo, Wyoming, and has been in this position for 6 years. His previous work experience includes serving as wildlife project manager for environmental consulting firm, working as research assistant at USDA APHIS National Wildlife Refuge Center, as well as stints in the USDA Forest Service and Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks. Zach enjoys utilizing his diverse wildlife and fisheries background to plan and implement landscape scale projects that benefit wide variety of resources from range to water to wildlife. In an effort to focus time and funding efforts related to these projects, he is currently working on a GIS model that will prioritize project areas within the district boundaries. Recent efforts towards soil health include assisting producers incorporating cover crops into their ranching systems with an emphasis on integrating livestock into the cover crops. When not at work, Zach loves to hunting, fishing, backpacking, and chasing his kids around Wyoming for their sports and endeavors. So I'd like to welcome Zach Byram for his presentation.
All right, thank you, everybody. I was telling some folks earlier today, yesterday when I left Wyoming, it was kind of sketchy as to whether or not I was actually going to be able to leave because of wind and blowing snow. I actually did make it to Salt Lake and then fell asleep on the plane. Woke up here and there's palm trees. So it was a little bit different of a day for me. It's not every day you wake up to snow and then wake up again to palm trees. So it was kind of a nice change to my norm. We're currently under a severe winter storm in Wyoming. And so being here out of that is a good change, and I'm happy to be here. Hope that the presentation I give here over the next little bit of time is something that you can take back with you, regardless of where you come from. Just as a little heads up, this presentation was kind of built on the preface of how we as a conservation district try to help ranchers incorporate cover crops into their ranching system. And so that's not to say that if you are a rancher listening to this presentation that there's not something that you'll be able to take from it as well. So just as a setting the stage for you guys a little bit, obviously you know that I'm from Wyoming. That's the square state just north of Denver, for those of you not aware of that. Johnson County is in the northeastern part of this state, and for any history buffs in the room, that's where the Johnson County cattle wars took place in the late 1880s, from the late 1880s through the early 1890s, and so there still is a little bit of a war being waged. There's still families from those participants back in the day, but I just wanted to start by going over a few numbers of the district and some of the ownerships that we have, just so people can get an idea of where I'm coming from for the rest of this presentation. So Clear Creek Conservation District is comprised of just over 1.4 million acres in Johnson County, Wyoming. 53% of those are private, 23% are Forest Service, so federally managed. Another 15% are managed by the Bureau of Land Management. There's 9% of that that's managed by the state of Wyoming. And so that gives you an idea, and you can see on the slide kind of how that is distributed throughout the conservation district. So Johnson County itself on the slide is the dark outline, of course, is the conservation district. Johnson County follows down to that other rectangle, and that gives you a good idea of the size that we're dealing with. Supposedly we are in a northern plains 10 to 14 inch precip zone, And in talking to most people today, we're in the same boat in terms of that seems very generous as of late, especially. This last summer, we got just over 8 inches, and most of that comes in April, May, and a little bit in June. The year previous to that, we got 7 inches. And so to say that we're in a 10 to 14 is maybe given it a little more credit than it deserves. So in terms of that acreage and what it looks like for our agricultural use, 75% of that acreage is dominated by range land, so native range land. 20% is the next biggest, and that's our forested lands. Now, the majority of those forested lands also have grazing leases on them. So between the forested lands and the range lands, we're looking at 95% of the land in our area is grazed either on private lands or through state or federal grazing permits. Now, the one that I want to pay attention to a little bit now is our irrigated cropland. So out of all of that acreage, we have about 3% that's actually irrigated cropland. So what does that mean? That means we've got about 32,000 acres of irrigated cropland in Johnson County, 30,000 of which is either for hay silage, or alfalfa grass. And so that gives you a really good idea of what that cropland is for. That cropland is for raising hay to feed the cows in the wintertime. We've got about 60,000 head in Johnson County of just cattle alone. There are operators that do have enough of their own private surface, or especially BLM grazing leases, that they are able to winter pasture cattle. But as everybody knows, there's always issues, whether it's grasshoppers or a hailstorm. We've been seeing an increase in fires in our area as well. So there's a lot of producers that do lose that winter pasture to different variables that oftentimes aren't controllable. So the reason I wanted to bring up those numbers is, as the title of the presentation indicates, we're going to be talking about incorporating cover crops into a ranching system. So I really wanted to have people have a good idea of what a ranching system, at least in my part of the world, looks like. They're a little bit different everywhere, but in Johnson County, the majority of our operations are cow-calf operations or yearling stocker run operations. So when we're talking about cover crops in an irrigated situation, that's not to say that the steps that we're going to talk about as we go through this presentation, that they're not applicable to dry land. That's not true. I just am focusing on the irrigated lands in this particular situation. Now, when I was talking about winter in the last slide, winters in northern Wyoming run about 7 months. So we're talking anywhere from end of October, definitely early November through April, often into the first week of May. So our first frost is usually that first week of October, and our last frost in the spring is usually that first week of May. So when we're talking about feeding cattle through the winter time, when hay last year was running $250 to $280 a ton, that obviously adds up. So that's what we're talking about, and that's why I'm focusing on the irrigated rather than the dry land. So again, our ranching systems in Johnson County consist of grazing on private or leased native range from May through November. The cattle are fed through the winter on hay, either grown or bought locally or purchased from out of the area. So I don't want to miss anybody, of course, and so I'm talking about cattle, but we do have a pretty large Basque population in Johnson County, and therefore we have a lot of sheep as well. Earlier I said we have about 60,000 head of cattle. We also have about 30,000 head of sheep in the area. This presentation and producers that I'm currently work with aren't running sheep on their operations. Most of those are kind of in the southern part of the county. We haven't really reached out that far yet. We are in Wyoming also, so that means there's a lot of cowboys. And in fact, the University of Wyoming, where I graduated from, their current marketing ploy is University of Wyoming, the world needs more cowboys. So that means we also have a lot of horses where I'm at. So again, we're not going to talk about sheep, not going to talk about horses, but just know that those are other types of livestock that can be integrated into ranching systems and cover crops. All right, so let's talk about the district and our approach to how we get cover crops into a ranching system. I should have mentioned earlier that for those of you that went out yesterday with Marlon Winger, he's kind of what I would call my mentor a little bit. He's kind of the one that introduced me to soil health probably about 4 years ago in a situation very similar to where we're at today. It was a soil health workshop. And I feel, after listening to Jimmy's talk earlier today, the addicted to tillage, I kind of feel the same way sometimes when I'm talking about soil health. I kind of feel like I'm in a special meeting and I'm, like, hi, my name is Zach and I've been dabbling in soil health for 3 years. So, it's really an interesting topic, and as my bio said, my background is mostly wildlife and fisheries, but as a conservation district, we wear a lot of hats, and this is kind of one of the topics. It's a hot button right now, and so I wanted to start going through the approach that we take to integrating cover crops into a ranching system, and we're going to talk about all of these in a little more depth, but just have a look. Soil health workshops and field tours, similar to what we're doing today and what you did yesterday with the field tour. Then after that, we'll meet with interested producers, and unfortunately for them, whenever we hold a soil health workshop, we also have a sign-in sheet with their contact information. So some call it stalking, I call it follow-up. So we'll reach out to everybody that comes, even if they left and didn't say a word. Oftentimes people may have questions that they didn't feel comfortable asking during the presentation, or thought of questions that they had after the presentation or the workshop and field tour. So we make sure that we reach out to everyone that attends just to make sure that we've covered our bases. After meeting with interested producers, then we go into kind of my favorite part, which is the data collection, interpreting those data results, and then we do produce a report for the producer. Between the third bubble and the fourth bubble, we like to try to meet with producers again. So if we have somebody that wants to incorporate cover crops into their ranching system, we meet with them again, and we do that for several different reasons, which you will see here in a little bit. After that second meeting with the producer, we do help them develop a seed mix, and then we plant and we pray. And then the fifth and last bubble there is kind of implementing the plan as a whole. So not just developing a seed mix and planting it and then forgetting about it. There's a plan that you've developed with the landowner, the producer, and that last important part is making sure that plan as a whole has been implemented. Now, for those of you taking notes, like I said, we are going to go through these in detail, but there may be a quiz at the end, so you might want to write these bubbles down. And if you get a question right during the quiz, you do get a hat as well. So, okay, so the first bubble, soil health and cover crop workshops and field tours. I think that's the best way to initiate that conversation with interested producers. There's an education component, there's a one-on-one interaction, there's getting your hands dirty, actually going out to a cover crop that's been planted, where they can ask the questions that they have, hopefully get the answers to those questions, or what's actually interesting to me is getting questions that I haven't thought of, or questions that I don't know the answers to, that I have to go back, and in doing that, I become better at trying to help producers move forward with this. So when we first started doing these workshops, I'm a little embarrassed to say that we focused on 4 of the 5 soil health principles. And a lot of that was because I was kind of new to the game, so to speak. So, we would focus on minimizing disturbance, maximizing biodiversity, maximizing soil armor, and then also trying to keep a continuous live root in the ground. And not that we didn't talk about livestock integration, but it was just part of the whole spiel. We didn't really focus on that. And after doing several of them and being in the area that we are, where it's strong on production agriculture with cattle, I really needed to take a step back and say, you know what, that doesn't make any sense to just gloss that over. These producers in our area, that's really the only reason or the only way that they're ever going to incorporate cover crops is if you work that in with their livestock. So after a few what may be called mildly failed attempts at workshops, we kind of started to get a better hang of it. So now our workshops include discussion of utilizing cover crops as forage to achieve the integration of livestock. So a good example of that would be, so your fall and winter mix. When we're talking to producers, we could reiterate to them that that's taking a high carbon annual cover crop, whether it's standing or a residue, and converting that into low carbon organic material, manure, poop, urine, whatever it may be. We're taking that high carbon, turning it into something that the soil can use. Same with spring and summer grazing. We can reiterate to them that, short grazing exposure followed by long rest periods can allow plants to regrow. So you can either take that as a crop, or as your cows are moving down the field, you can bring them back through a rotation of some type. We also try to reiterate reducing nutrient exports from the field. So that means, my part of the world, you heard Jimmy talking about getting that tick. People get the tick in my part of the world to let it grow, cut it down, put it in a bale, and take it off and stack it as neatly as you can on the road so you can show your neighbor that you're a better stacker of hay than he is. That's what they do. And so we wanted to highlight and try to reiterate that in doing that, you are moving the majority of your carbon from that field, stacking it somewhere else where it's not being utilized. So the other thing that's really important in our area to try to get people to think about anyway is that in utilizing cover crops, and it may not be full season, but in utilizing cover crops, you do have the opportunity to have your cows off of the perennial rangeland, and you give that rangeland an opportunity to kind of restore itself a little bit. Now, we do have operations that have 600, 700, 800 head on their operation, and they run them year round on rangeland. So when we're talking about production like that, if we are able to incorporate cover crops into their system, it's clearly, at least with the limited amount of irrigated ground that we have, we're not going to be able to be feeding all of their cows through the winter. So when we're talking about integrating this into ranching systems, there are some systems that we currently aren't able to do that with, but we have plenty of other outfits that are running 200 head of mama cows and calves, or we do have those outfits that we are able to do this with. And when we're talking about that perennial native land, rangeland, especially if it's leased through a federal or state agency, oftentimes they can only have the cows on there for so long anyway. So it does benefit them to have another way to feed those cows when they're coming off those leases. Okay, still in the vein of the workshops and field tours, I've just put up a list here of some of the concepts that we really try to hammer home at these workshops. So when we're trying to implement cover crops into a ranching system, again, we try to highlight these that you see up on the screen, and I'm not going to read through them all for you, but just know that there's some of them up there that from a producer standpoint are probably going to be more important to them than others. Now, they may understand and get that, you know, you can increase nutrient cycling, you can increase water infiltration, increase water holding capacity. Those are all really important things. But for a lot of producers, you know, they want to know, okay, well, how am I going to graze? Well, you can use this for supplemental grazing. You can decrease and maybe in the right circumstance eliminate need for that winter feed. That's a big deal. That's a really big deal for these guys. And potential to decrease inputs. So even though it all works together, there's going to be some that the light bulb goes off in their mind more so than some of the other ones. Now, knowing from our standpoint that it all works together is perfectly fine as long as we know that the producer is going to have his goals and his priorities. Okay, so field tours. The picture on the right is of a multi-species 14-way mix that we planted in early June. And so this is probably around the first week of July, so 45 days or so after planting. The one on the left, it's a video and I'm gonna play it in a minute, but I wanted to give it a little bit of context also. So for those of you that went out with Marlon yesterday, and I don't see Marlon in the room, which is a good thing, he is very, for those of you that were with him or listened to him talk, very dynamic, very fun, loves to interact with the producers. And so I'm gonna play this, hopefully it'll work. And I want you, if you can, listen. Hopefully it'll be loud enough.
Quick, slow, quick. Now the soil health two-step goes like this, Dave. Goes poop, urine. Poop, urine. Because what we want is we want to have a poop here, and urine in the middle. Is that right?
Okay, so as you can see, that's the kind of person that you want helping you out at your field tours or your workshops. Marlon will jump right in and do what he calls the soil health two-step with anybody. That particular producer is that's one of our dryland areas right there. It happened to be and for our area they kind of cheat a little bit. They're in kind of a little microclimate next to a creek that's a little bit lower than some other places. And it's amazing, even 300 or 400 foot elevation, that they're lower than most of the other places around them. Their dry land is often just as good as what you can see in some irrigated stuff. But again, those are some of the things that really stick in a producer's mind when you're meeting with them. You can sit down in a classroom like this, or you can sit down at their kitchen table over a cup of coffee, but getting out into the fields, and not just good fields, but to be honest with everybody, you've got to make sure that they know that there is an opportunity at times that these aren't going to work, especially if we're in a dryland situation. I mean, we all know that at that point, we're at Mother Nature's whim, and she's not always kind. But I wasn't going to show that if Marlon was in here because I didn't want to embarrass him, but I don't think Marlon gets embarrassed very easily. Okay, so now we're moving on to bubble number 2 for those of you keeping notes wanting to win a hat when we have a quiz at the end. And that's meeting with the interested producers. Okay, so after our workshops or our field tours, you'll have the people that are interested right off the bat that are going to come up. They're going to interact with you. They're going to talk with you. They're going to ask questions. They're going to want to set up a time for you to come up and look at their operation and get going from there. Now, there's the other ones that I had talked about earlier that we have a tendency to follow up with. And in doing that, those follow-ups, I think, is just as important because those folks probably are interested. They're just mulling it over for themselves a little bit. So they may need just another little push. They may have some other questions that weren't asked or that they had thought of in the time between the workshop and whenever you are able to track them down again. But meeting with the producers, I think, is probably the hinge pin to the whole idea of trying to incorporate these into their system. because all the producers have different goals and objectives. So you've got to find out what their needs are, what their priorities are, and what their wants are. Just because rancher on Smith Road wants to do it one way doesn't mean that his neighbor 5 miles away has the same priorities or the same needs or wants. So that's what you really need to meet with the producers to figure out. Then you want to talk with them about their operations. So what kind of operation do they have? So in my world, in my area, we've got 4,200 people in 3 million acres. There's not a lot of us. We all know each other pretty well. I haven't been asked for my ID at the bank for who knows how long, when I'm taking money out or putting money in. We all know each other. So that means that I know what most of the producers in my area are doing. I know whether it's a cow-calf operation. I know if it's a yearling operation. One of our producers runs the ecotourism gig in the summertime, takes people on pack trips, day-long, 3-day-long, week-long trips. So he has horses and mules. So his priorities and his wants and needs are going to be different than someone that's grass finishing their beef versus someone that may be wanting to run a couple flocks of sheep. So you've really got to know what their operation is about. How is their operation run? Is it mostly run on rangeland? Some of those earlier slides would allude to yes. Most of the producers in our area are run on rangelands, but that doesn't mean that's the case with wherever you guys are at. Do you have irrigated cropland available? That's a question, one of the first questions I like to find out, because just because I know where their operation is doesn't mean that they don't have cropland somewhere else that they can irrigate on. When? So figure out when you're talking to them when. So I mean, like timing of their calving, weaning, pasture rotations. When do they like to do those things? This all starts to paint a picture of how you can help them in terms of implementing cover crops into this system. And then also, I think a good question to ask them is, why are they interested? We go through the workshops and the field tours, but that can't necessarily be the only reason why they're interested in trying cover crops. There's got to be another reason that they're talking with you. So it's good to know why they want to do it. Maybe they're just at the end of the rope and want to try something new, or maybe they've been thinking about it for a few years and they've already bought a no-till and they're really gung-ho about it. Everybody's going to have a different outlook on it. Yeah, absolutely. Mm-hmm. Right. Mm-hmm. Right. So I think your question is, if we're in a dryland situation and the producer doesn't have animals, how do we get them interested in trying cover crops? Yeah, and that's a great question. And I think at that point, all we can continue to do is the same steps that we're going through now. And it's up to the producer at the end of the day whether or not they want to try it for, the cover crops, in my opinion, is for the soil health benefits. They may have another reason that they're wanting to do it. For instance, we do have some folks, and I'll talk about one of them here in a little bit. They want to increase their wildlife habitat. So if we're looking at it from from that standpoint, where your animal units are now wildlife, whether it's deer, turkeys, other types of upland birds, there's a reason that they might want to be doing that. So each producer has their own ideas, their own goals, whether they're dryland or irrigated. So there's also the opportunity, if you do have a successful dryland cover crop, there's plenty of animals, at least in where I come from, that there is the opportunity to lease that ground to other folks. They can bring their cattle or sheep in, and to get that livestock integration benefit from that cover crop. Did I answer your question? Okay. So other things to talk about when we're meeting with the producers is the environmental considerations. Of course, when you're meeting with the producer in your area, you're aware of what the climate's like, what the rainfall is like, what the growing season is like, all of those kinds of things. I just wanted to mention that because it is important that you have that discussion with the landowner in terms of these are the things that we're limited by in our environment currently. The other one that I listed on there is irrigation regulation. I'm not familiar with how it is in most other states. Wyoming is a seniority state. So the first person that established a water right has seniority over someone that developed their water right years later. So in Johnson County, a senior water right was established in 1864. If you don't have 1864 rights, you're probably going to be getting shut off about the middle third week of July. And this coming summer, it might be even earlier than that, just based on what our lack of snowpack looks like. So you may think that having a 1904 water right in Johnson County is fantastic, but unfortunately, you're pretty junior, so there's already some other straws in that bottle that are, when they want the water, they're going to get the water. So that's one thing that I always make sure we talk to the producers about is if we're in an irrigated situation, how long are you going to be able to utilize that irrigation water for? Yeah, so once that water right is established, it's tied to the land. So if Rancher Bob sells his operation to me, those water rights come with the land. So now I have those water rights. Yeah. So other things to talk about with the producer is different grazing and or haying options. You know, I said that word haying, you know, and that generally means you're exporting that carbon. Sometimes that's the best thing for the producer given lots of different variables. I'm not one that's going to try to talk them out of how to run their business. I am just going to provide other options for them to think about when we're talking about haying. Then also, of course, discuss budget and timing. So budget, of course, means the purchasing of seed, etc. So the conservation district that I work for, we have a soil health cost share program. So the first year that the producer is interested, we pay for 50% of the seed. And we do work with another entity that will split with the producer the other 50%. So the first year in our part of the world, the producer will pay for 25% of their cover crop seed. The reason we do that is knowing that there are certain hurdles and limitations that people have. We feel like that by being able to help them with the purchase of seed initially, that's a help that maybe gets them to continue doing it down the road. So the other thing that we do ask the producer to pay for is the soil tests that we do initially. And I do know that NRCS has cover crop programs as well, but I also know that those vary from state to state. So I would encourage anybody that has questions about what the NRCS may be able to do, I would encourage you to meet with your local NRCS folks, because what they do in Wyoming may be different than what they do in Utah, Idaho, etc. One other thing on the budget discussion is we do have a producer that has started her own little apiary. So she has got enough bee boxes out where it's profitable, and she sells that honey and uses the money from selling the honey to purchase cover crop seed for the following year. So, you know, the cover crops, We always try to, obviously, everybody's heard it. You want diversity. You're getting a lot of flowering plants. It makes a lot of sense. So there are ways that you can work other things in order to help with that. Another one of our producers, the one that I was talking about that was interested in wildlife habitat, he plants a cover crop with the hope that it provides good nesting, and as well as early and late brood rearing for upland game birds. So again, lots of diversity. We've got lots of insects, lots of bugs for baby birds to eat. He then takes a certain number of hunters, bird hunters, through the fall and winter, utilizes that money to purchase additional seed in the coming year. So just takes a little thinking out of the box sometimes, but just wanted to highlight those two situations so people can see that there is a means to an end when it comes to purchasing some seed. The other really important thing that needs to come out of your meeting with the producer is identify resource concerns. So this next slide kind of goes over some of the resource concerns, and some of these are just general. Of course, there's going to be a myriad of them, and they're going to vary from location to location. I just listed a few pretty simple ones, and then I also wanted to talk about termination. That's another conversation to have when you're meeting with your producers is, what are your plans for terminating? Are you going to terminate, number one? And then if you are, what's your timing going to look like on that? And then again, what is your method for termination? Are you going to use an herbicide? Are you going to crimp it? We have no producers in our area that have used a crimper. There's a couple that have talked about it. One of the biggest issues is we don't have a roller crimper in Johnson County. So that kind of limits, not that there's not some handy folks out there that couldn't make their own, but we haven't seen a lot of termination through roller crimping yet. Frost and winter kill, that happens to damn near everything we have in Wyoming is winter kill. So that's one that usually is used whether you want it to be or not. Grazing is another one. Again, the integration of livestock. We've found one producer in particular loves using grazing to terminate their cover crops. And it's, if anybody was listening next door earlier to Braden McMurdy, I think, I'm sure I butchered his last name, covers cattle and cash crops, I think is the title, something like that. He's presenting that again tomorrow. I would recommend listening to it. So this is mine is a perspective of trying to help someone do it. His is a perspective as a rancher that has done it. So it'd be really beneficial for you guys to listen to his also, to learn, he's done some of these things, roller crimped or grazed. Anyway, just a different perspective. I wanted to make sure that you guys have an opportunity to listen to him if you can. Okay, we're still meeting with the producers. It's like pot of coffee number 2 at their house, which works better. I enjoy going out and driving around their property and talking with them. It's better than having them come to my office where it's stuffy and I have a computer and nobody likes those things. So when you're meeting with your producers, you also need to discuss their time frame. I just have some just general examples of what their time frame may look like when we're talking about cover crops in their system. So spring, May, that's in our world, May 15th through June 15th, pretty short. And what they can do is graze a cover crop that they would have planted in the fall. So a fall cover crop, I've got some examples of species that we use in a few slides from now. Early summer, so June 15th to July 15th, they can still be grazing on that crop that was planted the previous fall. Late summer, so July through October 15th, if they have wanted to, a lot of times folks will want to get their first cutting alfalfa, and then they'll plant a cover crop into that. So that would be an example of what a late summer cover crop for grazing would look like. And then fall and winter. So again, I'm saying October 15th. It varies from middle of September through the end of October, but October 15th is usually when it really starts to get cold enough through the night, definitely through the night, that now we're going to be calling it winter and frost killed. So October 15th through who knows when, you try to graze stockpiled summer planted crop, or there's a potential too to leave that standing and just graze them through this. If you plant late in the summer, your sorghum Sudan grasses, some YO winter peas, some hairy vetch, you plant that in July and then let it stand till it's dead, turn the cattle into there in the wintertime. So just some general time frames for producers, see where their operation fits into one of those. And then also talk about different grazing options that they have. And of course, again, some general ones, you can tweak these a couple hundred different ways each, but whatever the producer needs to do to make it work for them, that's what we'll focus on. So, there's rotational grazing, there's high stock density grazing, and the season of use, I should have probably put it in that other side, but a season of use is just when do they want to try to implement these covers into their system. Oh, sorry, I wanted to back up real quick. Y'all were probably staring at the picture of that turnip while I was talking, which makes sense because I wanted you guys to see that, radishes and turnips are oftentimes planted for their compaction component, or breaking compaction up. They do graze the turnips also. And as a side note, if anybody knows of a way to market turnips, like figure out that line and get the corner market on that, because I can grow turnips in anything in Wyoming. It's amazing. They'll do great in any season, regardless of how much water they've gotten. It's pretty impressive. They may not get real big, like Braden had a picture of one that was probably about the size of his head, but we'll get some that are grapefruit size, but they grow like crazy. Yeah, I'll do that in my spare time. I'll become a kimchi master, right? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Sure. I'm going to write that down. Okay. So moving on to our next little bubble there from the beginning of the presentation. After we've met with them, we kind of have started to develop a little bit of a plan. There's still some missing information that we need. So we try to gather that through field analysis and data gathering. All of the tests you guys probably talked about yesterday or have done yourselves or know about anyway. We'll do a water infiltration test. This is just an example of a table, just some numbers I threw in for this presentation. But we'll incorporate this into an analysis and a report once we're done with all of the other studies. And we'll sit down again with the producer and go through these findings. For those of you that are sharp-eyed and didn't want to embarrass me, yes, that is a coffee can that we're doing that water infiltration test with. Of course, you'd want to use a soil ring, but that particular day I was not able to find my soil ring. And it just so turns out that the coffee can in the break room is the exact same diameter. So cut the bottom off. The only hard part was it's not quite as strong as the soil ring, so you had to kind of serrate the edges and work it into the soil a little bit easier rather than just pound it in. But I said that because I know there's somebody out there saying, well, that's a coffee can, it's not a soil ring. The other test we'll do, and don't let this slide or the table blow your mind. It's pretty simple if you really look at it hard. That was a joke. But worm counts are my favorite thing to do. It takes me back to going fishing with my family when we were younger. Mom and Dad sending us out to the garden to dig up worms. That's exactly what we're doing here. I'm not going to go through the process. I think you've probably all heard of how to do it. Same with the water infiltration test. But it's fun for me to be sitting out in the field with a spade, counting worms and saying, I'm getting paid to do this. This is fantastic. Not a lot of people get paid to count worms on a Wednesday afternoon. It's just fantastic. So it's my favorite part of the analysis. And of course, we all know that worms are a real good indicator of soil health. You've heard other people talk about it. So I'm I'm not going to go into it, but don't let anybody else do the worm counts for you. You need to get out and do them yourself. The other thing we'll do is collect soil samples to do a Haney soil health test with. I saw that Ward Labs is here today, and they're they're one of the sponsors of the program yesterday and today and tomorrow. But that's where we send our soil health tests off to get a Haney soil test done. Again, I'm not going to get into our approach to it. It's pretty standard and everybody's probably done it. But, we collect a number of samples, and that will be determined by the size of the area you're interested in and also the variability of the field. What I mean by that is if you've got a 100-acre pivot and there's, 2 or 3 acres in the middle that's higher than everything else, clearly has a different soil type. If you'd like to sample that separately, but don't include something that looks out of the ordinary for the rest of the field when you're doing your sampling. Because the way we do it is we'll collect the samples, mix them all up together, and then take our sample that we send to the lab out of that. The other thing that we've tried to do is to take these samples from the same place at the same time each year. So we'll go out, we'll soil sample, we'll do the worm count, and we'll do the water infiltration all at the same time. And some of the soils I can do the worm count, collect soil, and sit there and read the world news while I'm waiting for the water infiltration test to finish. But I'll also GPS that location. That way when we go back the following year and the year after that, and hopefully if the producer sticks with it in years down the road, I'll be able to be fairly close, or as close as I can be, to making sure I'm taking those samples from the same spot. The other important part of that is doing them as close as you can in terms of timing. If I was to take a soil sample May 1st and then go back and take a soil sample in August or September, their results are going to be completely different. It's a living system, and in May, it may just be coming out of being froze. In September, it just spent the last 2 months of over 100 degrees and 30-mile-an-hour winds every day. So just those are some things to think about when you're out there doing your soil samples. Try to do it the same time of year in the same place. So the Haney soil test, for those that aren't familiar with it, it's a test that is designed to mimic nature's approach to soil nutrient availability, and it asks the 3 questions that are up there. What is your soil's condition? Is your soil in balance? And what can you do to help your soil? So I know you can't see it very well. It was the best I could do, but that's what your result page looks like when you get sample results back from a Haney test. There's a lot of information on there, and luckily Ward Labs has a fantastic website. They have an interpretive guide that walks you through each one of those and goes into great detail about what each one of those is and what your results can mean. Some things that I'll point out that it does show you, for instance, it says cover crop suggestion on this one is 50% legume, 50% grass. Well, okay, thanks. 50% of each. I probably could have gotten that. But there's some really important ones up there. I'm not going to go through them, but just know that when you get these and you get all googly-eyed, that there is an interpretive guide on their website that will help you out. Now, what I do with them, this will really get you googly-eyed. So if I have multiple fields in the same producer, I'll put them all together and then I'll color code those results. It's, in my mind, guys especially have boxes that you take a box out, you open it up, you do what you need to do, you close the box, you slide it back in. That's how my brain works, one thing at a time. So if I can put everything together and color code it, so in a quick glance, I can kind of start to narrow down what some of those resource concerns in the soil are, at least in terms from a soil health test perspective. That's what I'll do. Now, the part that's unfair about it is in the far right column. That's a 5-year national average. So that's what I'm basing how I'm marking as colors. But that's not really fair, or it's probably not even very accurate, because the 5-year national average means that there are soil health tests from Iowa, Illinois, Ohio that are included in here, where, you know, there's also soil from Utah, Wyoming, Arizona, New Mexico also included in these averages. So what that means is maybe not really anything. So what we've started to do is develop our own averages. So I'm collecting all this data and then taking from my area and using those to base what the health of the soil is. Because we may have, you know, we have pretty high pHs. That's just how it is right now. We have low organic matter. We have a lot of these tests are going to be completely different than if I call a counterpart in Iowa and say, hey, let's compare tests. I mean, they're going to be completely different. So I do this just as a general kind of quick way to start establishing a baseline, but we are starting to establish our own local baseline. Okay. So after we've done all that, I produce a report for the producer that includes what you see up here, including a map with locations of where we sampled from. A lot of that's just for my own records. We'll do some fun looking bar graphs that look like soil, try to wow them with colors. But the gist of it is that now we've met with them, we know what their goals are, and now we have some other information that we can really develop a plan with. So after we've done all that, we meet with them again, and then we start to design a mix for that system. So you want to make sure that you're matching the proper forage species with the season of use, which is critical to optimize forage production. And when we're trying to talk about grazing livestock, optimizing forage production is the number one thing that the producer is going to be interested in. Not to say that they're not interested in the soil health, because that's what gets us there, but they want to know that they're going to be getting enough production. So any of the mixes that we design for a full season. What that means is that we're including cool season grasses and brassicas, as well as warm season grasses and brassicas. The reason we do that is obviously it creates diversity. It also minimizes the risk due to weather conditions. It extends the grazing period due to different growth stages, and increases the soil health conditions overall. Yes. Yeah, so that would be, a 12 or a 14 way mix. We would have 3 cool season grasses, 2 cool season brassicas, a couple warm season grasses and warm season brassicas, and then legumes or broadleafs in there as well, but definitely some legumes. So a cover crop that we would use for spring and early summer grazing, we would want to plant that in the fall. So that means August, September. And this is what we usually have been using. We use a winter wheat, a winter rye, a winter triticale, and a winter annual of some type, whether that's a vetch, or there's also a new one out there that you may not have heard about yet. It's called a Wyoming winter pea. It was actually developed at the University of Wyoming, where it's Arctic all of the time. So it's a good one to use in a mix. I grew up in Laramie, so I can say that it is literally cold from the end of August through the middle of June, late June. So that Wyoming winter pea has worked really well for us in northern Wyoming. And I'm going to start going through some of these pretty quick. So let's get to, these are all just some recommendations of things to think about when we're designing a mix. Especially, so this one's summer grazing and haying. Again, I use that hay word, but you gotta go with what works for the producer. So there's a bunch of different options they have when it comes to utilizing the mixes for grazing. You can graze only and then plant your next crop into that residue. You can hay only and then plant the crop into that residue. You can graze, let it regrow and then hay it, or you can do the opposite. You can hay it, let it regrow, and then you can graze it. or you can let it stand for winter feed. And if they have enough area, you can do some of each and see what works best for them. Or in doing that, you can provide a full season grazing regime. But again, regardless of your intended practice, you've got to make sure that you're using a diverse mix of the cool and warm season species. All right, so we've talked about this a little bit in terms of what it looks like for late season grazing. So that's October-ish, November-ish through April. Just some things that have worked well in Wyoming. Brassicas can be a good choice because their forage quality after killing frost is still really good. We also like to use sorghum Sudan grass because it's got great biomass and stands up to the weather pretty well. That late season cover crop can be part of a dual crop system also. And you just make sure that you are careful of your timing of planting. If you get too late into your year, you lose value in that planting. Okay, so this is kind of an important one. Every time you design a mix or you're working in a ranching system or any system for that matter, you're going to have limitations and you're going to have considerations you need to think about. I've just listed some of those. Of course, there's going to be additional ones depending on who you're working with and where you're working with them. But one important thing to remember is design the mix for what you don't have. That means you need to look at that information that you've gathered, whether it's from the Haney soil test, your worm counts, your water infiltration, the producer's goals and priorities. What they don't have is what you need to try to design that mix to help get. Now, you guys have all seen this, I'm sure, before. I saw some of these floating around in the trade room. It's a cover crop periodic table developed by NRCS folks in Wyoming. I think it's been tweaked and distributed to other places. It just gives a nice, easy breakdown of different species that are cool season versus warm season grasses, brassicas, legumes. Like I said, I saw some of these out in the trade show. You can probably still track some down if you haven't already gotten a hold of these or have seen them before. They're good to start with. And the reason I say that is because I've now found green cover seed. So green cover seed, for those of you that haven't used it or designed a mix before, this is the creme of the crop, in my opinion. We use some others. We use Millborn seed. They're out of South Dakota. Being from Wyoming, South Dakota is closer than some of these other places. Green cover, I believe, is in Bladen, Nebraska. But I'm just going to go through a few slides here to show you how we utilize green cover and how they help us out. So the biggest thing that green cover has, besides a huge library of information on all of these different species, is they have what they call a smart mix. So in the smart mix, you can see you have an opportunity to list your goals. There's a drop down and there's 12 or 15 different goals. You put the highest priority, the next priority, and the third highest priority. You hit send or you hit go. It gives you a list of all the different species that fit those goals that can help fix, if nitrogen fixation or supplemental grazing, whatever your priorities are, it'll list you all the different grasses, brassicas, legumes, and broadleafs that they have that will help fit that. On the left, you can see they have different options. They have 37 species that meet that in turn excellently. They have 23 that are good and on down the line. So you can pick and choose from those, making sure that you have your diversity. Some other nice things about the Smart Mix is it has an auto adjust. So you can fill in your pounds per acre or you can let it do it for you. I like to let it do it for me. Okay, there's the Smart Mix. Yeah. It also has a mix effect that allows you to see how well your mix is potentially meeting some of those important rankings or the priorities that you put in. Okay, the last thing we do is we implement that plan, okay? So we've done the workshops and the field tours. We've met with our producers. This is Shelby. She's a producer runs a cow-calf operation on about 800 acres, 250 which are irrigated. She's the one that has the apiary that's paying for her seed through making the bees work for her. We've conducted our field analysis, and we've also met with the producers again. We've met with them again, of course, to refine their goals and objectives, identify their resource concerns, develop a grazing plan, define the timing of the planting and the grazing, and then define a termination technique that works for their operation. Shelby doesn't want to use any herbicides, so we've been figuring out how to use grazing, when to use grazing, to use that as her termination method. And then we design and purchase the seed mix. And then probably the most important thing we can ever do is plant and pray, right? We can have the best laid plans, but we know that that doesn't mean that it's going to work every time. So just be cognizant of that and be willing to take those chances. Be willing to talk with the producer about being, kind of steadfast and sticking with it. It's going to take time. As Jimmy mentioned earlier in the talk this morning, it's a patience thing. It's going to take some years. You're going to fail from time to time. It's a living system. You may not see the results you want right away, but you got to stick with it. So when you stick with the plan, I'm just going to show you some pictures to end this with. But that's a fall mix that we planted in August, I think, early September, okay. That's June 15th. That's non-irrigated, 2.5 tons an acre, which in northern Wyoming is pretty good. The one on the right, we planted into the one on the left. So we planted it in, grazed off, and then took the cows out. This is what came up in the middle of August, 3 more tons an acre. Okay, so these are just pictures. I'm just going to scroll through to kind of show what happens if the plan comes together. Now, of course, I'm not showing you the pictures of the dry land that didn't work so well, but just know that that is a real option also. Those are post hole diggers in the background there, integrating the livestock. This is dry land right here, actually, and you can see, or I hope you can see, that in between the rows, look at all that residue that's there. That's probably why that dry land mix is doing as well as it is. More residue, same field. My favorite thing to do, worm counts. Roots, obviously these are young plants, but you can see that they're already starting to establish a pretty good root system. Other roots, right? Your radishes, your turnips, and you can see the buckwheats blooming. Again, integration of livestock into that system. Marlin could be doing the soil health 2-step. There's poop, poop, pee, poop, poop, pee, residue. So the take home really is soil health principles are universal. They can be applied anywhere. However, there are constraints and limitations that we have to work within. So every operation is unique and their approach to cover crops is going to be different. There is no one size fits all for this. We really need to be cognizant of that. Just because I have a mix that works doesn't mean it's going to work down the road, and it may not work into that producer's plan anyway. So with that, I would be happy to take any questions. So I think especially, so the question was, when we have a 12 or 14 on up maybe to 20 way mix, are all of those seeds germinating? And I think the question also is based on the seed size and what depth they're normally wanting to be planted at, can they be successful? And I think that we've had pretty good luck with getting most of those species to grow once they've been planted. The one we've struggled with a little bit is teff grass, and I think that's because teff grass seed is so tiny. If it does get down into the soil, it's probably too deep because it may not be the best way to do it. But if we have peas and we have teff grass, we shoot for the middle in terms of depth, right? So I think some of your smaller grasses, like the teff grass, may be a struggle from time to time, but we haven't ever not been able to grow. We've always been able to find something that we've planted. Yes. Mm-hmm.
And the instructions that came with the seed said it was planted about May 1st, in my geographic area. Well, what's concerning me after listening to you and others, by May 1st, I want to put it in an older established pasture.
Mm-hmm.
I'm afraid the pasture will be grown up to all it, smother out the little seeds trying to sprout. Would it work to say maybe take the first cutting off and then put that in, or what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, without knowing, so the question is, you have a mix that was developed by Green Cover that says to plant in early May 1st, but you have an established system that's already pretty tall by that point. And okay, so yeah, you have some options there. You could certainly take that first cutting and then plant, but depending on what that current crop is or grass is or whatever your system is, you'd want to probably take that cutting, terminate, and then plant. So I just got but I would.
No, you're going to die right now.
Does that?
When we wrap up, we're into a break.
Okay. I can talk with you more if you'd like, but thank you. And if there are any other more questions, I'll be wandering around this afternoon and this evening at the social. So thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
So now break off into a break.